Hi there. Welcome to today's edition of HLS Webcasts. I'm your host, Michael Giannotti, and I will be your host for today's session, including all moderation. Today, I'm very excited. We have a very special broadcast. We're featuring Microsoft's Michael Trachtenberg, and he's going to be talking to us today about document acknowledgement and attestation. Hope I'm saying that right, with the Microsoft Power Platform. I'm going to let him introduce himself in a moment. This is a great chance to get to see the whole building of an app and all the innards and what goes on into it, ask questions, etc. But before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. So first of all, besides today's session being very cool and maybe needing a pair of shades, we want to hear from you. We love to hear from you, where you're from, what's going on. So, if you want to send shout outs, you should see over on the right-hand side of your screen, the Q&A panel. If you don't see that, look up in the little corner. You'll see a little, looks like a dialog box with a question mark in it. You can click that to open it. But you can go ahead, post, let us know, where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Also, as you have questions, you can post them here. Now, I will tell you that we're going to try to save a lot of those right till the end, just to not break the flow, because Michael's going in depth with the whole end to end. But definitely you can shoot them as you think about them. I'll queue those up and have those ready. And then once we're into Q&A, we'll just fire those off and make sure we get your questions answered. But a lot to cover today. We're very excited to have you, very excited about this particular webcast. And with that, I am going to push Michael's content over and let Michael introduce himself. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Nice to meet you all. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today to our webcast for HLS. Very excited to spend the next hour or so with you all and going over the Power Platform and really diving into a specific use case, right? Because that's really where we see a lot of the benefit of this platform kind of shining through, which is, okay, I have this problem and I want to solve for it, right? And we're going to look at that through multiple angles here today. So just so everyone understands like what we're going to, what the flow of the conversation is going to be, I'm going to spend a very short amount of time in slides. Wouldn't be a Microsoft presentation without some good slideware. And then we're going to look at like, how do we start to analyze a problem and solve a solution for the Power Platform? And then after that, we're going to actually build that together. And, during that part, I will have my fingers crossed because there'll be plenty of demoing and, hopefully it all works. And it should. So thank you again all for joining. Again, I'm Mike Trachtenberg and happy to walk you through the session here today. So let's dive in. So again, a few slides, not going to spend too much time on here, but for the Power Platform, really, it's based off of a series, these three main product lines, right? Microsoft Flow, PowerApps, and Power BI. And these each have their own individual role in how we leverage them in order to solve a problem centered around business automation, business intelligence, but just also helping to get more out of the technology we're already using. If we start to look at each one of those three pieces, we're going to talk today about each one more in depth and kind of show pieces of it. But the first one is PowerApps. For those that are not familiar, hopefully most people are tuning into this webcast. But if you're not, PowerApps is really a low-code, no-code engine for building easy to use applications, right? And those applications can be consumed via web browser. They can be used via your mobile device. They can be embedded into Teams. But just some quick ideas of like things that you could do with this is if you have a, let's say a lot of times you'll start with scenarios in HR, right? Where if you have an HR system on the back end that people log and maintain their paid time off, their PTO, and typically people would submit their PTO via a web portal, or they submit to via their manager via email or calendar invite sometimes. The Power Platform, and specifically PowerApps, gives you the ability to build a nice, quick, easy front end that is a mobile application that people can enter in their PTO. And then that mobile application can be tied on the back end to other larger HR systems and enter in those requests automatically, right? And those are some of the type of examples that you can start to think of, like what you can do with the Power Platform. You can have these on-premise data silos, data repositories. You can build these quick, easy, lightweight front-end applications that people can interact with those data repositories on the back end. And PowerApps is an interface for you to build applications to do that. Right? Then we have Microsoft Flow, which is nothing more than a business operations or workflow automation tool, right? So it is a step-by-step process for automating tasks. And you could see why those two products, PowerApps and Flow, could work together. You could be executing something within an application that once someone submits something, a business automation takes place, right? Do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And Flow will execute those steps and produce outcomes. So really, in a nutshell, that's what we're going to be leveraging Flow for today, and what you could leverage Flow for across your organization. And then lastly, we have Power BI, right? So all of the business automation and user experience improvements with the Power Apps, all those things are great, and automating your business is awesome. But then we might want to serve up information on and visually review the status of things, right? So Power BI is industry-leading data analytics and data visualization tool. So if you build one of these business processes, you could build dashboards to accompany it, and build reporting for management or for line of business owners, or for anyone really to start to view and interact with their data. So harkening back to the same PTO example, the individual users that could have dashboards for what they have available to them for as far as PTO goes, but then management could look at scheduling PTO resource allocations, resource alignment, time off schedules across their organization for overlap and coverage for all the people within their department. So those three pieces together produce full solutions for us. So when we look at that, we're going to now say, okay, we're going to focus on a specific example today, right? So the example that we want to focus on is one that has come up actually a few times with some of our customers, which is, how do we put out policies, right, and make sure that people are reading them, and then that they're accepting those policies, right? So that's the process of attestation, right? So we all do it. We do it all the time for just about all technology that we consume in our daily lives, right? You install an app, it tells you to accept the terms and conditions. You upgrade to a new version of an OS, it tells you to accept, the policies of that. So now when we think about that in a business sense, right, when you're coming onboarded to a new organization, you might need to accept the policies for that company, right? Or if you're coming into a new department within the same organization, you might need to accept the policies for that department, right? When you do that, I mean, that's for many reasons, right? If we talk specifically about the healthcare environment, right? Certain departments would have different requirements for HIPAA and PHI. So they would have a policy associated with their handling of that type of information. So when you come onboarded into that department, you have to accept that, and you need to understand it, and you need to know the types of ways that information is handled within there, and you must read the documents and accept, right? So now let's start to think about, how do we build a simplistic, we'll start simplistically. This stuff can get very complicated, obviously, but we're going to start to think about a simplistic way to do just that. All right, so I'm going to switch now from the PowerPoint piece to a little bit whiteboarding, right? And what we're going to think about is, like, well, what does this, how would this work? How would we do this, right? And if we think about, like, okay, the first part is, people need to, right, accept documents, right? And then we have to first say, okay, well, where are these documents stored, right? And we say, okay, maybe they're in SharePoint, right? And again, you might have, file servers, you might have, some type of OneDrive, you might have, other locations where these particular documents are stored. So the first part is identifying where they are and having some commonality there, right? So for today, we're gonna say, okay, we store our policy and procedure documents inside of SharePoint. So then we started to think like, okay, well, what do we want the experience to be like, right? So we know that we have SharePoint sites with multiple document libraries, right? And we have, some type of, maybe these are PDF formats or they're, Word documents, right? And these are our policy documents that we want people to accept, right? And, there's certain metadata and certain pieces of information that go along with this, right? Maybe like the department that is associated with this particular document, maybe the date it was created, right, is there. Maybe the a policy number is associated with it. Obviously, there's some SharePoint like ID numbers that are associated with this particular document as well, right? And maybe we rather have either a version control, right? So a version control, and possibly like also whether this is the most current or something like that, right? So we have our documents that are all stored here in a SharePoint, and and they go on and on by departments. And maybe this particular SharePoint document library, maybe we have 20 of them, maybe we have 5, right? It could be random, but let's just assume that this is how our documents are stored. So we then need to think, okay, well, what do we want the experience to be like for 2 people, right? So we have the admin, right? And this is not necessarily like a SharePoint admin, but this is the person that administers this particular policy, right? So we say, okay, for this particular admin, he goes in, he or she, and they update these policies. Maybe they have permissions to write to this policy, they have permissions to update and edit it, and when they do that, basically they have to have the ability to notify, right? They want to be able to notify all the people that are going to be affected by this policy, and for then those people to be able to go in and attest to it, or to at least acknowledge and accept, however you want to describe it. So so the first part is analyzing like, okay, do we want this administrator's process to change, or do we want them to just interact with SharePoint, right? And do it the same way that they're used to doing it. So starting off, we'll kind of keep things a little bit the same, and we say, okay, we're going to have the administrator live in SharePoint still, and basically do their typical working methodology, which is updating and working with the document within SharePoint, version control and all of that, and then being able to notify the people from within there, right? So that's going to be the first part, which is the first one is the admin, right? Work within SharePoint and notify people, testers, via SharePoint. Don't mind my sloppy handwriting. It's not really important, but just but yeah, I know it's bad. So so that's the first part, right? Is identifying how we want this to all be initiated, right? So then we know here that this is going to be an initiating factor, right? This is going to be how we're going to kick off the actual workflow process, right? So the admin goes in, they update the documents, and then they're going to initiate something that's going to notify everyone that says, hey, and hey, so and so, this new policy is there for you to attest to it. Okay, great. So we know what we want our trigger to be. So then we have to identify, okay, how is this policy going to be tied to specific people, right? And there's lots of ways to do that, but in a very simplistic way, we could have another column here that is the user/groups of the people that need to attest to it, and maybe that's tied to Active Directory groups. So we have just another column within SharePoint that the admin will enter in there, and then that's going to basically be used as part of this workflow process to say like, okay, when the notification goes out, it's going to be tied to that particular group inside of the SharePoint environment. Okay, great. So once that we understand that that's the process that we want to be initiated, we say, okay, well, what then needs to happen for the end user, right? What happens to the people that need to be notified, right? And in this particular example, we'll run through today, it's just very simple, right? It's either within, we could say within Teams, right? Or within email, right? They are basically, they receive an email or Teams And what they receive is a link to the policy, and they're presented with a choice, with two choices, right? To attest to it or to deny it, right? And they're able to pick, one of these two options directly from, their teams or from their email. When they receive these particular options and then they select either one of them, right? Then we have a little branch that says, okay, if they attest to it, well, what's happening there? How do we then, track that? And we have to then think, okay, well, maybe we need to go back a step, right? So also when we say the admin is going to notify these particular people based on this group here, right? Based on their group membership, maybe then we're creating another SharePoint list, and this could be any type of database or document or log repository, and we could say, there's a request to attest, right? The date that it was generated, the date that they are attested, and whether they attested or not, right? So when this notification gets sent out, at the same time, we're going to generate a log item, right? So we just say number 1 here, and it's going to be, so and so was requested that they did attest to it. This was the date that they were asked to attest to it, and by default, we're going to say no, they did not attest to it yet. Then getting back to this portion here, which is from the user perspective, right? They received an email or a Teams notification with the link to the document, and it's going to, again, have those two options, either attest or deny. And when they do attest to it, it's going to go in and it's going to populate this no to a yes, right? And it's going to enter in the date in which they did attest to it. And if they deny it, maybe they get presented with some type of chat feature, or they it sends a message, to their manager to tell them, well, why, right? Why? What is your issue with this particular policy, and why don't you wish to acknowledge it, right? So we could have some branching logic there. So you could see by building this second SharePoint list and this second set of process here, we're actually building a logging system here, right? And then the last part would be like, okay, well, that would close the loop on this particular process. We would have the managers be able to send out, these requests to acknowledge documents. We have a logging system for whether they're doing it, yes or no, and we have a recourse or feedback loop for if they are denying it here, right? And then obviously what we could do with this last part is we could tie this particular logging system to some, dashboarding to show, who's, yes, no, right? And this is also possibly unanswered, right? And then open requests possibly. And then we could, maybe have a slicer or some bar charts to show, who's done what over time for their particular their policy. And maybe we have, the ability to break it down by some, departments, right? Department A. Okay, so this is this gives us a good now visual representation of, actually, what it is that we're going to build and how do we actually start to build this out. So this would actually help us to say, okay, we're not just building a flow, or we're not just building an app. We're solving a specific process by making sure that we understand the problem, which is the ability for people to acknowledge documents. And we know with the technology that we're using currently and just where the documents are, how we're going to get people to do that. So this is a good starting point. And then from there, we'll dive into now, like, well, how do we make this work, right? All right, so I'm going to open up a our browser here, and we're going to start working with these pieces. Some of this is going to be through the magic of cooking shows, right? But not too much of it, I promise. But some of them are simple things, right? Like so here I have a SharePoint, and this is very rudimentary. There's nothing crazy going on here. I have a SharePoint list that has a Word document that is a HIPAA PHI policy document here. And I have some of the columns like we talked about, right? Where, who modified it, who, when was it last modified, the number, the department it's associated with, and, people that need to attest, right? So, and these could be, users, emails, groups, and so on. So, so we have that piece there done. So for this particular SharePoint library, we're going to then start by building that first component of it, right? And if we go back to our whiteboard, it's just that we're going to say, okay, when an administrator has a document that they want to notify people about, they're going to be able to select that document and notify the attesters. All right, so let's start with that. So going there back to my Office 365, I'm going to start with a document flow here. So if I go to flow, this is the business automation piece where we're going to be able to build those logical steps, right? And I'm going to just go to new, and I'm going to go to create from template, and we're going to just see here a tremendous amount of templates here where we see all different types of things, right, for Microsoft Flow. But I'm going to type for SharePoint because that's what we're starting with, and we're going to see a number of items, right? And we're going to see, start approval for an item, all this. But I'm specifically looking for something like this: complete a custom action for a selected file. So just going in, I'm going to start with this, but you're going to see that it's going to be closest to what we want to start with, which is when someone selects a file, do something, right? And for those of you that haven't used Flow, it's pretty simple, but going through it, I'll try to explain as much as I can. So the first part is, so this first part here is the trigger, and we spoke about that, right? So it's saying when for a selected file, get the properties and then do something. So we're going to say, okay, well, where is this file? And we're going to pick our document library, right, where the documents are located. So we're going to say this one, and we're going to say, well, which document library is it? So it's actually this one, the acknowledgement documents, and that is this particular Word document that I was just showing you here. So let's see, here I was. So it knows the document libraries that I have access to. It's pulling those up for me. It's making it easy for me to identify that. But obviously, I could just go over here and copy this particular web address and stick that in, in order to get to there. All right. So when it does that, it's then asking me like, okay, we need to get the properties of that file because we're going to use them for things, right? So it's the same thing, the same library here, and now it's got information on the particular file that we've selected, right? And so from there, we say, okay, so now we have the file, it was selected, and we have the information. What are we going to do next? So the next step would be going back to our whiteboard here. We say, okay, we have the file, we have the information, so we're going to do two things. One is we're going to create a log entry for this particular file that we're asking users to attest to, and then we're going to start that acknowledgement process. All right, so in this part, I'm going to say, okay, you have that file selected, start to make those entries inside of the other SharePoint list. So so inside of here, now we're going to start some actions. So I'm going to go to SharePoint, right? And we have a whole list of different things that we could do in SharePoint. So I'm going to create an item. And what SharePoint list is it? Oh, I got to pick this one. So we're going to stay within that same site address. And now we have this acknowledgement log, right? So all this is another SharePoint list that I created, right? Here's a SharePoint list. It just has a number of different columns, right? Just like we spoke about, did someone acknowledge it? Yes or no? What was the policy number? When did they acknowledge it? What was the name of the policy, right? So I just created these particular columns on that SharePoint list, and we say, okay, this is we're going to create an item for that particular one. What is the title going to be of that? We could enter in information here. So one of the things when you click in here, you're going to see this pop up, and this is called dynamic content. So it's going to know the information from this get properties piece, and we're going to say, all right, since you know the information on that particular file, we're going to for the title, we're going to look for maybe the name of the document, or let's see, or the identifier, or I'm going to pick the name of for the selected file here, the username. So this could be the person that triggered the flow. No, actually we don't want that one. We want the attesters, the people that need to attest to it. The rest of this information we could pump this in, or we could leave it blank at this time, right? So for right now, I'll leave it as it is. But the main part here is the default for whether or not they acknowledge it. I want it to be set to no. So like we talked about, so by default it's creating that log and they did not attest to it. So from here we're going to add another step now. So with that log item created, we now want to start the process of giving people an email or a Teams notification that they could accept that document or not, right? And for here, I'm actually going to do an approval process. The approval process really is just going to give us that interface that gives us what we want, right? And you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to do an approval process to wait for someone to respond, right? And I'm going to give them two options, right? Which is to accept this document or to deny it, right? So they have those options to do that. Then it becomes, well, what is the title of this particular request, right? And it's going to say, please accept this policy. All right. And now you could do a mix of text that I'm entering here, or or dynamic content, right? So I'm going to say the name of the item in the document library, right? So it's going to say, please accept this policy, and then the name of that particular item. And who is it assigned to? It's assigned to here. We're going to go for the dynamic content again, and you're going to see these portions where it says create item, and then you see this right here, it says create item. So that means it's getting information from that piece right there. So we actually want from the for the selected item, I want to get the information from the selected item for who needs to attest it. So I want to get the attesters from there. So so here we go. There. So I got that. Right. And then we want to give them a link to the item too, right? So not on the create item, but on the get the file properties. So we want the link to the specific document there. So now they have the link to the document, and then they're able to see that in that approval process. And we could say this is the description. So rather than have a long link, we just say, link to the document. This way, this is what shows up for them. All right. After that piece, so now the next step is that we build a switch that basically shows that, okay, well, what happens when they accept and what happens when they deny? So so we just are building the outcomes, right? So we say, okay, for a switch, let's say, all right, if they and this is on and this part is showing that on the outcome of the approval process, and if they did select accept, what is the action that we want to take? So in this case, when they accept it, maybe we're going to now go and update that other SharePoint list to basically say, yes, they updated it, right? So we're going to say update. And notice I'm just typing what I want to do in here, and it's finding suggestions, right? So here's update item. So now we're going to update that's our SharePoint list location. That's the particular SharePoint list, right? And then here is the ID from where we created that item, and the title is going to be I believe that's just the the title of the document. Response. So here, response. So this is, we want to update with the response approved. No, not the approver's name. Yes, that's the approver's name. So this way, for everyone that goes and responds to that, and again, this is where there's going to be some, trial and error pieces in there. But for people that respond, it's going to go and update that they accepted that, and it's going to put their name in there for them. And then we obviously, the main part is switching that acknowledged field to yes, where in our previous step when we first created this flow, we set the acknowledgement to no. All right, so you should get the gist of how these portions are working, and then from there we can say, all right, this looks, fairly basic, but it should kind of prove the gist. So we could save it over here, and then while it's saving, we can start to look at, all right, are there any errors here, right? So we can check this for any particular errors. There doesn't seem to be any, and then we can go ahead and give this a test, right? So a few things before we do that. If we go into our flows here, we actually have to make this available then for the managers to execute it as part of that SharePoint list, right? So if I go into this particular flow, I could go and I could see the owners here, which is myself. I made it. But if I go in, I could go to the SharePoint portion here, and I could make this available inside of this particular document. So basically what this means is that those policy administrators can execute this flow directly from the that SharePoint list. Okay, so with this created, well, what does it look like now executing it, right? So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go over to my SharePoint environment. This is where the documents reside, right? This is my fictitious example here, right? I mean, it's a real document. We could, click on it, and this is just a, basic policy document for HIPAA and PHI. So say, okay, this is the one that we want people to accept. I select the document, and then inside of our ribbon here, we have the ability to execute these flows that we just created. So here's the one that we just made. Here's one that I made earlier, which basically does the same exact items that we just created now. So I'm just gonna click this one also because it's already built. So when I click on that, it's going to go ahead and I'm going to run that flow. And what's going to happen is it's going to do the process like we just said, right? It's going to create the item inside of the log, and it's going to send an email for approval for people to attest or to acknowledge that document, right? So if we go to the acknowledgement log, let's refresh here, right? And now we could see a new item just popped up, saying that there's this document that I need to go in and accept it. I'm going to pop over into Outlook here for this account, and we should see a request come in, hopefully. All right, so here it is, right? So we just got this this request, 12:30. It's saying that and this is from Flow, but here's the pieces, right? That this is requested I go ahead and attest to this document. I have the link to the particular document. I can click on it. I'm being brought right to the policy. And then I can go ahead and I could accept it. I could give some rationale here, and I could go ahead and submit that. All right, and when I do that, I should be able to pop back into our SharePoint list, refresh this. Oh, yep. And you could go ahead and see that this particular line item is now accepted. I've acknowledged it. It updated with my name, right? So, that Mike Trachtenberg, acknowledged this particular document and when it happened, right? So in a real basic sense, we've accomplished the first pieces of this particular workflow, right? Where we have the ability now to, and I apologize for my horrible handwriting, but work within documents that are in SharePoint give managers the ability to select those documents and notify individuals about them that they have to attest to, and then to send out notifications for them. When the notification gets sent out, people receive it via email, or we could do it Teams notifications as well, and they are can click on it, and when they click on it, they're prompted to accept, and they accept, and it updates the logging system. So this is great, right? The first step of this is pretty good, or pretty well working. One of the things then becomes is like, okay, well, this isn't the best user experience for a few different reasons. Like, one is, what's happening inside of Outlook. What if people miss this? How do people actually review all of their different policies that they have to accept? What if you wanted to review the document side by side while you're looking to accept it, right? It is popping up inside this other tab there, but if you wanted to build an overlay or something like that, or a little window where the document is next to it, all those things become possible. But then we have to go outside of the realm of just the automation piece, right? And this is where we have to look at, okay, we need to start to develop a easier to use application, a front end application for users to review and accept their documents, right? And that's what we'll start now, right? We'll build a little bit of a Power App, right? So that users can see their documents that they have to accept, and they could accept them from within the app. And you'll see a few different things that we're going to do in there to do that, right? So it's the same thing actually inside of the Office 365 portal. Just going to PowerApps, right? I'm going to be brought to here, and I'm kind of glossing over a little bit about the environments and governance, right? And that's a conversation for another day, right? This is really just understanding what you can do with this platform. So here we're going to create an app, right? And when we go to do this, we're going to create a there's two different types of apps mainly. There's Canvas apps and model-driven apps. And Canvas apps are what you would imagine like single page-ish kind of applications where people can use them on tablets and phones, and they're lightweight. You could use them in the web browser and those pieces. And then there's model-driven applications, which are similar to full-fledged, fully baked out data-driven sales processes, where, or not just sales, just business processes, one of which could be sales, could be procurement, could be onboarding, so to speak, where you have multiple stages and you need to do multiple form entries inside of each stage to progress the stages, right? So that's what a model-driven application would be versus a Canvas-based application. So we're going to start by building a Canvas application, right? Something lightweight that the end users can use on their mobile phones or right from the browser to accept these documents when they need to accept them, right? So I'm going to go in and start here. I'm going to create this, and notice I'm saying to start with my data. And the reason for that is because we were building that log system, right, where that log is housing information from SharePoint that says, these are these requests, these are the people that need to request it, and whether they've been accepted or not, right? So that's the perfect place to then pull that information in, so I could present the users with the particular items that they want to attest, right? So this is where also we might go back to like our whiteboard piece here, and we say, all right, we're really interjecting, where we have this process here, and we're going to build a parallel process now. And just to bring this down here, where we're going to have an app, and we just need to think this out a little bit. We say, okay, we're going to have an app. We want to have the user presented with all of the policies that pertain to them, right? And they'll be able to select on the particular policy. And when they select that policy, they're going to be brought to a detailed page about it, right? So this is, policy 4, right? And it's going to have information about it, the link to it. And then we want to basically give them a button to, accept it. Right? And then when they click on accept for this particular policy, it's going to basically do the same thing that this flow did before, which is go back and update this particular column inside of SharePoint from not attested to yes, right? So that's what we want to do. So we understand our goal, which is to make that same thing happen. So we're going to go in and try to make that happen, right? So we're going to start with our SharePoint content, and it's kind of the same thing where we're going to grab here's our log information. We'll grab our URL here, and we're going to pump this into this. Say okay, and it notices all my SharePoint list there, which is this log one, and we're going to go ahead and connect to that. And it's going to start to guess, right? It's just guessing like what I want to use with this, and it could be right, it could not be right, it's not always right, but it's going to at least start with something, right? And I could start to see here now it pulled in some things, right? And now it's building a quick little application. Now this is a low code, no code, interface for building an application, mobile app. I'm not a developer, right? I don't pretend to be, so I'm this is all point clicky ways of doing this, right? But I have been messing around with this for a little bit, so we're gonna start to see like, okay, maybe now I clicked on that. That looked like it brought me right into that screen for the information on that particular item. All right, so I have this. It's showing me the date, some number, and my name, but this information is not useful. So if we want to start to edit this piece, I'm gonna actually start to click on stuff, and we'll kind of take it from there. So you're going to see the first part is this browser gallery, and you're going to see up here this line that shows what basically it's doing. And it's just saying that it's pulling in the information from that SharePoint list, and it's filtering it, and it's filtering it by title. All right, great. So if I wanted to see what that actually means, like what is the title, I have this area for fields over here, and I could see the different fields that are being brought in. So the policy number, the title, and the date acknowledged, right? So that's not really sufficient. I need a few other items there, like maybe I want to see the policy name. So I'm going to insert, some additional labels. And it's actually guessing the next ones that I want to bring in. And it did bring in the policy name, which is, okay, that's great. So what I can do is I could actually pull this over and notice for other entries in the particular gallery here, it is moving all of them together. So that's helpful, right? So I could push that over, and I could push this over, and just kind of trying to make this a little bit more of what I wanted to show here. And if you don't know the particular like what each one is, right, I could click on it, and it's showing me here. It says this item is the policy number. So I'm going to start to I'll add some text in here, some labels, and this one is bringing up another field from the SharePoint library, but I don't want that. I want specific text so that I could enter in information here for basically aligning to the other fields that are popping up, right? So maybe policy name here is a good place to start. I want it to just say policy name. I want it to always say policy name. That's why it's not a variable. I'll stick it over here, right? I'll take this one, I'll shrink it a little bit more so it all fits. And notice again that the second item is updating for me automatically as well. So now I know that that's a policy name, right? And then I'm going to, put in, accepted, the, date accepted. I got to put quotes in here. All right. So this is saying if I accepted the policy or not, I think, right? And again, let's look at what this one says. Date acknowledged. Yep. So that one, I know that I acknowledged it. And then this one is the policy number. So I could make this too, and I could copy and paste those things just to make my life easier. Okay. So now we at least have it a little bit nicer, where we could see like, okay, I have the policy number, I have the date that I accepted, so I know I accepted that one, and then the policy name, I know that what the name of that policy is. So So now if I had 30, 40 policies that I need to accepted, and these you could have, other items, obviously, like renewal date or, status pendings, and you could filter these by having the ones that are outstanding to be accepted, right? All of those things are possibilities. So, but from a quick standpoint, we're able to see these pieces, right? So now I want to go into click the wrong button. Click on this button and actually go into the actual documents. And what happens when I'm clicking on that button is it's going to this other page, right? And we could see that is when I select this particular piece in the gallery here, it's going to select the parent. And basically it's just going to mean that it's going to select that item, that row item in SharePoint, and it's going to go to it, right? And then it's going to navigate to it. And when we get to that detail screen, and you can see that in our left navigation here, you can see like, oh, okay, it's going to go to this detail screen, and these are the particular items that it's showing inside of here, right? And now maybe, there's certain things that I want to do. Do I want to allow people to edit it, right? I have a button here that says, when someone selects this, it's telling you what it does, right? It's going to navigate to the edit screen, which is this. And maybe, I don't want them to do that, right? I don't want anyone to be able to edit those pieces here, and I'll just, take that away, right? So people can never go to to that piece. And now, I guess one of the things that I do want to do for sure is, give people the ability to attest this document here, right? I could also see, for instance, I don't have a link to the document inside of here, or any or the ability to see like the actual ID or any piece of information there. So we'll start off. We'll add the first part, which is a button, right? So I'm going to add a button, drag this down here, and for this button, I want to tie it to exactly what we said, which was in the whiteboarding piece, is when someone accepts this, right? I'm going to change the button to say accept, that it's going to update that portion in SharePoint. So inside of here, I'm going to double click on this particular piece that says button, and I'm going to type accept. So there's lots of ways, to edit the content in here, right? So you can see here, I double clicked on that in order to change that. But I could also go over here to the text inside of the properties of that button and change it here to read whatever it is I want it to read. All right. So now when I select it, you're also going to see this drop down change, right? And this drop down is giving me a whole host of different options, right? Where people, if you hover over it, to make it a different color, to change the font, right? But the to change the padding or the press field, right? There's all options. So I don't need to know the programming for what to do to basically to make a button, or to say like what happens when that it is a button, that when someone clicks on it, an action has to happen. It knows that from me already, and it basically says on select, what do I want to happen, right? So now, well, when someone clicks it, I want to execute another flow, right? So underneath action, I have the ability to inject additional flows here. Only issue is we didn't make that flow yet, right? We have a flow that encompassed, these items, right? Which was all of this, but we didn't have a flow that just basically says, hey, when someone clicks this button inside of this app, to go and do the same thing that happens over there. So we could make that quickly, right? So if I go to create create, right, and I could say, just type in PowerApps. I'm searching for a template here, right? And there's, a PowerApps button, right? And you can see examples of all types of things, like PowerApps to send an approval for email. But here's just a PowerApps button, right? So this is the most straightforward way. Someone's going to click on something inside of PowerApps, and it's going to do something, right? And as we saw before, we just wanted to update an item in SharePoint. So I click on that. I click on the update item in SharePoint. I pick on the SharePoint list again, right? And then we need to add in this particular information, right? Which is the ID. So we need to use dynamic content in here, and it should load it should load the title. Let's start searching. Let's click this. Oh, here we go. Update item title. I got it. Okay. And then the ID, PowerApps, right? So it's going to update the item ID. So basically all that's going to do from the SharePoint side is basically, or on the PowerApp side, is when you click on this button, it's going to know the details of this particular item that was selected in SharePoint, and it's going to execute that. So if I click on the flows here, I say, okay, I want to add that, so that's what it's going to do, right? And then that's what it's going to run. So now I could see it, right? That this Power App is going to run when someone selects this, and it's going to ask for those two particular items, which inside of the flow we saw were the update item ID and the update item title. So this part we can say, okay, well, how do we find that information, right? So we have the title here, and we could actually see inside of this what that title, you need to find the data card information, which is going to, you could click through these pieces if you don't know, or just going into here, we could see that the data card value number number 1, right? And that's going to be the title information. And then we would do the same for finding the ID portion, right? So just because we're running a little bit short on time, I want to just show you the pieces of that are already done here. I'm going to edit this, right? So this is basically just a few steps further along. Where, same thing. We go into a particular, actually I'm going to do this, where we could demo the application in real time. I'm going to select this particular item. I could see this information here, right? The policy I'm going to click on to accept this policy, right? And it's going to navigate to additional screen. That policy was accepted. And now going back to my list here, right? I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And we're going to see that component was acknowledged as well. Now, the only thing is I didn't have this update just to the name, which we could have done that also by tweaking that flow a little bit to also update the name, and then the title for that would have been updated as well. So yeah, so you could give people a front-end app, fairly easy to create, that could go in and accept these pieces. Again, if I preview this app, this was exactly what it would look like on the phone. I could, see all my policies here. I could select them. I could go ahead and accept this policy, give people the ability to edit these pieces. Again, this is what it would look like exactly on the mobile device as well. So, so I just want to really quickly then dive into the last part, which would be, and I'll try to only spend about a few minutes on this. How do you report on this data, right? So we're able to build the flow, build the actual a little app to sit in front of it for people to accept, and now we want to give people the ability to view and report on this, right? So this is where we dive into Power BI. So inside of Power BI here, I have my personal workspaces. I can look at any types of reports that I have driven or written here. If I click on this here, you're going to see. Let's see, I'm going to go and edit this report. Okay, so this is connected, and this is something I just set up previously, but it's connected to my my 2 SharePoint lists, right? I have the documents, which I'm not really going to need, but I also have the SharePoint log items here. Right, and I could start off very simply by building a table, right? And with that, I'm going to just select the things that I want to add in here. Right, I'm going to add. I want to see the title. I want to see, whether that person acknowledged or not, right? I want to see the date that they acknowledged. All right, and then I possibly want to see the name of that particular policy. So here I could see that this person did not accept this. Now I know we just did that, right? So I could refresh this data set to show that. Which I could go here. I want to save my changes. I want to refresh now this data so I can get the updated pieces from there. And again, those things that could be set to be automatic. And it's going to refresh. All right. So while it's doing that, I'm going to pop back into here, and we'll build one or two more things while that data is refreshing. Okay. So go back to edit the report. So I could really easily build a table to show this, right? While that data is also refreshing, I want to maybe put in a slicer, right? Oops. Okay, so I overrid that one. But I'm going to put in a slicer also. That's going to give me the ability to maybe filter this by department. Actually, yeah, we'll do it by policy. That's not policy name. So then when I have multiple policies in here, I can check off the different policies I want to see how many people attested to. And then lastly, maybe I want to build a graph to show, whether or not the multiple people attested to which policies and the yes or no components to it, right? So we can do that and the policy name. That's a value, right? And then we could, filter by the yes or no's in there too. So right now we only have that one, and let's go ahead and save this and see if we had a refresh, if we refresh it, and if we got the updated data. And actually, I'm not sure why the data was not refreshing, but you could check that. Try it one more time. Yeah, so here I could have another example of this really quickly. So it's got to be like, I have one more. Just to show you what this looks like with a little bit more data, I have another example here. So here's the same thing, just a little bit more built out, where I have it tied to a larger data set where we could see the different counts, who's attested, who hasn't by number, and a stacked bar chart. The number of different policies where we could start to filter against them, and I could see the yes or no's and the percentages. I could go into something like this where it's radiology, and I could see that that everyone has attested to that particular policy. I could see the requests and which ones would be outstanding, and overall have an overall look across my organization to show the number of total outstanding requests. So those are the from start to finish, a little bit on the Power Platform, a little bit on how do we start to analyze a problem and start to think about how we build something across the Power Platform, building some flows in order to execute the business process, a little bit on the PowerApps side, which would be to create the applications so that people can use it and how to connect it to the data. And then a little bit on the reporting side, which is you connect that data to some visualizations and how you could manipulate that data and start to work with it. So I know I kind of took up the whole hour there. I'm willing. I don't have a hard stop. I could stay on to answer some questions.
And we only had two questions. One of them I answered by text on there, Michael. So
awesome.
Let's go over to. So this is Mike Giannotti, and the first question, I'll just answer it orally as well as I already typed it out, but they asked if Flow could connect to DocuSign and or Adobe Sign. And so I put the links, they're actually in the Q&A, moderated Q&A, so we do have connectors for both. So you can certainly include those. And I know right out of the gate we've been doing Adobe Sign for quite a bit. So that's available. The other question though that we did have, and this came to us from London. So we got the UK, so they gave us a shout out and a question all at once. So Mike, you've gone international, and by the way, we also had Germany here today. So the question was, if you wanted to issue the attestation to a group of users who all need to approve, and I want to track who has and hasn't approved, how would you approach that? So it's just kind of a conceptual.
So yes, so that we can most certainly do that. So there's two ways. One is, and I could actually show you this. So this is there's obviously a lot more complex ones for these, but here is another method, another piece that's going to answer your question a little bit more. So this is where we're doing the same thing that we did before, but now we have to create some variables in the flow creation process. And what we're doing here is we need to, one is we need to normalize email strings, right? So inside of that SharePoint list, maybe you have multiple entries, right? Multiple people or multiple groups inside of the one SharePoint list item. So maybe we need to normalize those. Maybe like you use the people picker, and the people picker, which is their identity, doesn't match their email address. That's one common issue. So we have to do some normalization there. Another way then is if you have multiple entries, you need to build an array, right? Which is this, right? So we're going to create an array that's going to capture all of the groups or all of the people in that particular SharePoint list. And then you build this loop, right? Which is an apply to each, right? Where now we say we build an array, and then for every item in that array, right, we're going to do the same exact process in Flow. So that's the conceptual way that you would do that for multiple people as part of a group.
Awesome. So I think that's it for questions. So I think we're good. Thank you very much, Michael. I'm going to go ahead and just, I guess, wrap this up and make a couple of announcements. But first of all, we want to thank Michael for coming on today. That was a great, I mean, we're seeing a real world example of how to build an app. So you got to see, kind of a setup, then the actual architecting of that with whiteboarding, what are we going to do, and kind of really laying that out and doing a good job around that, and then showing the building of it, right? So, end to end, this is going to be a great one. We are, and this was another question, we are going to be posting this afternoon. So I'll take this broadcast, the recording, I'll be posting this on our site at aka.ms/HLS blog. That's aka.ms/HLS blog. So be sure to share that with your colleagues. I think this is a great way for folks to get started, to kind of walk through and build a real world example themselves, and to get you, we saw end to end from building the app to reporting on the app. So, that's pretty much the whole kit and caboodle right there. Our next broadcast, just so you know, it's not for almost another month unless we have requests. So if you have requests for other broadcasts, some content you'd like to see covered, the next one is slated for November 21st. And that's part of our AMA, Microsoft Teams AMA, or Ask Me Anything series that will feature myself, Microsoft's Pete Anello, and Microsoft's Samantha Brown. And that's where we'll have a little bit of a tee up. I believe we do have like a 15-minute tee up to begin that one. It is on, waiting for my screen to refresh. I just clicked on the actual join us for the AMA series. Here we go. So it'll be like a 15-minute tee up talking about non-native team room systems and Microsoft Teams meetings. So what that means if you have a non-native and how to connect that up. So we'll have that, but that'll be on the 21st. Be sure to tune in. We are rescheduling the one for the 28th because Pete has a conflict that came up. But 21st, that's on tap. If you have requests, we'd love to hear them. You know, you can always post them on our blog at aka.ms/HLS-blog. Tomislav, you're welcome. He said, thank you very much. And, you know, we want to thank everybody for tuning in. But with that, this is Mike Giannotti and Michael Trachtenberg bidding everybody have a great day. Take care. And as always, ciao.
Thanks, everyone.